If you misgender someone, don't beat yourself up about it. Give that person 5 compliments in your brain using their correct pronouns.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and then later on in the pod, we are so excited to be speaking with Reverend Kali Cawthon-Freels, who has been tapped to help lead Good Faith Media's Faithful Pride Initiative. It is a great conversation and a good episode, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
I'm so frustrated,
Okay.
which I feel like I say that about half the time.
Well, I mean, about half the time you are frustrated, so let's
That
go
is
with that.
not untrue. That is not untrue. Okay, so I'm going to finally tell the story of what we've been dealing with for the last 2 months. And I know I've maybe mentioned it in passing on the podcast.
I'm just saying, there's a lot under that heading, so I can't wait to hear what you're about to share.
Yes, what we've been dealing with. That could be a lot of things. But no, I know I've kind of mentioned it and you've tried to talk about it. And I just was like, I cannot talk about this right now. But here I am ready to talk about this because I'm so frustrated.
I know who you're talking about.
Okay, so for the last couple of months, you and I have been trying to evict some squatters
Yes, we
from
have.
underneath our house.
Squatters, episode 2.
True. We have moved to a part of town that is not like the very new cleared out, cookie cutter houses, suburbia. We're
Yeah.
in, kind of old town.
Central
with,
Norman.
yes, with lots of like I don't know, just trees and places, a lot of more wildlife around these
Yeah.
parts. Anywho, so yes, we realized a couple months ago that we had a skunk
We did.
living under our house, and thankfully it hadn't sprayed under the house, but we found a hole where he had been coming in and out, and so we immediately jumped into action, right, to relocate
Yes.
this skunk. We learned that you actually are not supposed to do that. There's a lot of rules and regulations, so I'm going to be very careful to protect the innocent in this story.
Right.
So, anyways, when we realized that was going on, you went into action and immediately put a camera
I did.
outside,
And
a ring
the
camera.
camera's name is?
Elmer Fudd.
Exactly
Okay.
right. So we check Elmer every night.
That's right. So we began watching for the skunks, and
Yep.
we had someone come out and put some traps out, and we started just one by one catching skunks, right?
Yeah, what we've discovered, it wasn't just one skunk.
No. So then our person, who shall remain nameless, has
Mhm.
been relocating them. Like
Right.
legit relocating them to a
absolutely.
place that's safer for them and safer for
Mhm.
us.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's not like, where you take your dog to
No.
Grandpa's farm.
They're
no.
truly being relocated. I
Right.
know this because we thought we had seen the last of them,
Mhm.
right? We had waited them out. We had, put the camera by the hole, and
Yep.
we had, done the traps, done all the things you needed to do.
We thought we had caught our limit.
We did. And then we went out of town, one of the times we went out of town, and I got an alert.
Mm-hmm. What did
on
Elmer Fudd have to say?
Elmer Fudd says there's motion.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked, and granted, before we left town, when our friend who was helping us was like, okay, we're good. Seal up the hole.
Right.
Right? So what did we do? We sealed up,
Up
the
the
hole.
hole.
We are good, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
No more skunks.
Yep.
So we're out of town. The camera alert goes off. You and I are in a meeting, and I sat and watched. I watched as a skunk came back, and he started digging up under the hole that we had sealed. And not only that, but he was like, come on, y'all, brought all his family back.
Yeah.
And so
He brought his crew back.
we
There's
had
no
to
doubt
start
about that.
all over again. So I went down the Google rabbit hole, skunk hole,
Mhm. Ah,
and started looking into it. And apparently they are able to find their way back.
They can travel great distances.
They can. You have to take them like more than 5 miles, which I think they were taking more than 5 miles out of town.
But these are exceptional skunks.
Clearly they're exceptional skunks. Because I've learned there is quite a difference between city skunks and country skunks. And if you didn't know this was going to be an informational podcast about skunks,
wow.
You're in luck, because it is. I have done so much research on
It's really
skunks.
obscene. I'm a little bit worried about you. I mean, when you recognize different skunks on the camera,
I know them now.
I mean, you're kind of crazy skunk lady at this point.
I am. I know them by their markings. This is how I know that they came back. They made it back, because it was like one of them came back. I'm like, hey, I recognize that guy. And then he's like waving all his buddies. Come on, y'all. I got the door open. And going back underneath, I'm just I don't know what to do at this point. Like, I don't want to hurt a living thing, but at the same time, thankfully, like I said, they've never sprayed under the house. And as far as I know, they're really not bothering me.
We would know if they spray.
We would, and that's the fear. You've got to kind of take care of it before they do spray, or, it's going to like be in your house for months and months. Anyways, my point is, in saying this, is that just that feeling when we were watching the skunk on the camera, just watching him just dig and dig away at the hole we had just so carefully barricaded.
Right.
Like it was nothing. And we were just helpless. Again, we're sitting in a meeting. Like there's nothing I can do.
There's absolutely nothing we can do.
Nothing I can do. We're sitting there. And it just feels really a lot like the country we're living in right now. We are sitting here watching destruction, and it feels like we can do nothing about it. Like, where's the exterminator to call?
Where's the trap to lay?
That's right.
Where's the Elmer Fudd's watching?
That's right.
My goodness.
I can put a trap with some pretty girl in it. That might entice some folks to go in.
Oh my goodness. Yes, it does seem like things are in disarray and things stink.
Like you can see it happening and it stinks, and there's just, sometimes it feels like there's just nothing. You're paralyzed. Like, what can I do?
Yeah.
I'm watching this unfold on a television, and I can't get to it to make it stop.
Well, speaking of unexpected visitors to our town, did you see that Vanity Fair had come to Norman, Oklahoma?
I did. And you guys, it's bad when Vanity Fair comes to Norman, Oklahoma to interview preachers nonetheless.
That's right.
Like literally, our pastor is on the cover of a Vanity Fair article. And while he is very nice looking, he's not a Vanity Fair cover model. I'm just saying.
Wow. I bet Jacob Topper's going to take offense to that. I think he's quite striking.
He is striking. But I did not have Jacob Topper on the cover of Vanity Fair in my 2025 bingo card.
Okay, well, that's fair.
But anyways, yes, I did see it.
Yeah. Well, they were here covering the debacle that is the state of Oklahoma and our state superintendent, Ryan Walters. As our listeners are probably aware of from this podcast and your own research, Ryan Walters has been trying at every attempt. He's been making every attempt
to impress the president.
Impress the president, yeah, but also to infuse Christian nationalism principles into the public schools. Began with trying to fund a private charter Catholic school with public money. That's been blocked numerous times by the voters as well as by courts who've ruled in favor of those who oppose it, which I am one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And then more recently, he has decided to spend millions of dollars to buy the Trump Bible so that every student can have the Trump Bible in their classrooms. And then also, in addition to that, to infuse the curriculum with Christian nationalism, language, and a rewriting of history, what some of us would term the whitewashing of history as well, into the local classrooms. And so
it feels like he's trying to lower the bar a little bit to like make up for that 49th in education or whatever it is rating that we've had.
50. We're trying to get to 50.
We're trying to get to 50. Because, I mean, if there's anything that's going to improve your educational standing, it's definitely infusing the Bible and Christian nationalism into curriculum.
Right.
It just makes zero sense.
Makes zero sense. Well, asked about why Walters is doing that, there's always the platitudes that we hear, most commonly coming from Christian nationalists and fundamentalists. But he also cited Donald Trump's most recent executive order that was signed by the president this month to create the White House Faith Office and to establish a subcommittee that would investigate anti-Christian activities, Missy.
So what exactly would be an what did you say, anti-Christian
Yeah.
activity?
Yeah.
Anti-Christian activity. Is that dancing, drinking?
That's a
I don't
great
know.
question. That is a great question.
What
We
is
don't know
it?
what brand of Christianity we're talking about. But let me read. This is section 1 of the executive
Oh,
order. And it's brief.
excellent.
Yeah, this is great reading. But this is it. It's under purpose and policy. It is the policy of the United States with the purpose of this order to protect the religious freedoms of Americans and end the anti-Christian weaponization of government. The founders established a nation in which people were free to practice their faith without fear of discrimination or retaliation by their government. And here lies the problem with not only this order, but just the entire idea.
Yeah, you need
at
to make
large.
this make sense because it's not
Yeah,
computing.
and that the president and Christian nationalists, they tend to use very familiar language and then use half truths to propagate something that is very, very dastardly. And that's what's happening in this instance. That, he is right. The president is right when he says the founders established a nation in which people were free to practice their faith without fear of discrimination.
Full stop.
Yep.
Just full stop.
Okay.
Like
Yep.
that just needs to be
That's
it.
all just need to be said.
Okay, but go on.
But this whole this idea of that there's anti-Christian weaponization out there, and while I understand and I'm somewhat sympathetic to the overstretch of the government in trying to weed out all religious jargon and religious language. That there is a place for religion and religious symbols within the United States of America, but it should never be funded by the federal government. Taxpayer dollars should never be associated with that. And we need to remain neutral as a government. At the same time, people of faith have always had the right to express their faith.
Right.
Students have had the right to wear religious jargon to class, to have a Bible on their desk. Teachers have had rights as well, even as employers. They just can't advance religion,
Right.
At the state's expense. And so that's always been the place. But there's been this incredibly false narrative that has been perpetuated and promoted by Christian nationalism that Christians are under persecution
Right.
in this country. And now we've got an arm of the federal government that's going to weed that out. But there is absolutely zero definition of what that means. So we have no idea, as you asked a while ago, what that means as far as anti-Christian weaponry is considered. The one thing that we do know from history, though, Missy,
What's that?
is that the greatest persecutor of Christians has been
Let me take a guess. Christians?
Christians,
Oh,
fellow Christians. That's
shocker.
absolutely right. And while there has been persecution throughout history, there's persecution even today against Christians in other nations. And that needs to be addressed and
Sure.
needs to be called out and condemned whenever that arises. But I would say the same thing about people of the Jewish faith as well as
Right.
the Muslim faith, any faith that is being ostracized and oppressed in the world. There needs to be people who stand up for them. But what Christians are experiencing here in the United States, particular evangelical Christians are experiencing, is not persecution. And David French has an incredible article in the New York Times last year, and he talks about the tension that exists between this idea of persecution and then also the more liberal idea of just having a complete secular public square. And, he says, most people fall in the middle. And I think French is
Sure.
right. But he says this, and I want to read this because I want to make certain I get his words right. He's talking about the justice system and the judiciary specifically. French writes, conservative and liberal justices have created a different sustainable equilibrium, but the religious liberty culture wars rages on anyway, in part because millions of Americans don't want to strike a balance. They actually, and this is the important part, they actually prefer domination to accommodation.
1,000%.
That is where the rubber meets the road, I think.
Absolutely. I remember growing up in, evangelical circles, and that was only the persecution. If you unpack or strip back what you were taught, it was more about we're evangelical and we're trying to recruit, and the other person doesn't want to
Right.
come be a part. And then then there's persecution because you're not coming to be part. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but that was more, like you said, you can wear a shirt or WWJD. You can express your faith as you want to. It's when you try to coerce, when you try to pressure someone else, in school or something else, it's not appropriate. And we were taught that therein is persecution. And so we were taught that we were being persecuted.
Yeah, and just also the whole idea that if someone else's rights are being infringed upon, that when we fight for those rights and demand for those rights, that somehow that is an attack on another person's religious liberty.
Right.
And that's not the case at all. For one person to gain rights in this country does not mean another person is losing rights.
Right.
As I've always said, you are absolutely free to hold the belief that abortion is wrong in this country, or that being gay is a sin. I wholeheartedly disagree with those notions, but you're free to do that in the United States of America. But what you're not allowed to do is try to impose that upon other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't believe in abortion, guess what? Don't get an abortion.
Right.
If you don't believe in gay marriage, don't marry someone of the same sex. That is you able to live out your religious freedom and conscience, but you can't impose that upon the rest of us. And so that's where I really take issue with what's going on here in Oklahoma. Vanity Fair points that out as far as education is concerned, but it's just not education. It's not just abortion. It is a real attempt to really target a group of people, whether that is African Americans, whether that is Native Americans, whether that is people from the LGBT community, target those people and then oppress them and ostracize them with a strict rendering and interpretation application of the Christian scriptures, which is so anti-Christian and certainly anti-American.
Right. I just have one thing to say about it.
What's that?
Something smells.
It is. And we will continue to be the Elmer Fudd for everybody.
That's right. And we will continue to update on our skunk eviction process.
That's absolutely right. Maybe we should make Elmer Fudd just have a live stream.
A live stream. Yes. That would be fun.
That would be fun. Well, I am so glad to be talking and visiting this week, Missy, with one of our dear friends, contributing correspondent here at Good Faith Media, and now working at Good Faith Media as a consultant on our brand new Faithful Pride initiative. And of course, I'm talking about none other than Reverend Kali Cawthon-Freels.
Right.
I'm so excited that we get to talk with her today.
Yes, somehow we talked her into coming on board in more of an official role with us at Good Faith Media, which we'll talk about during the interview. But we just adore Kali. She truly is just one of the most thoughtful, just smartest people that I've come across. And so I've really enjoyed getting to know her, and I'm so excited for this new initiative that we have.
Absolutely. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with Kali. Good Faith Media is the new home of A Sermon for Every Sunday. This free resource offers lectionary-based video sermons by America's best preachers for use in worship, Bible study, small groups, Sunday school classes, or for individual use. All you do is push the button. With A Sermon for Every Sunday, you can be inspired by and learn from some amazing preachers: Otis Moss III, Amy Butler, Brian McLaren, Starlette Thomas, Will Willimon, Michael Curry, and many, many more. Hundreds and hundreds of free sermons are waiting just for you. You can find them at goodfaithmedia.org or asermonforeverysunday.com. Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Reverend Kali Cawthon-Freels is a pastoral resident at Williamsburg Baptist Church in Virginia. She serves as pastoral staff in pastoral care and worship leadership and works with youth, college, and young adults. Kali is also a Good Faith Media author. Her most recent book is Reclamation, a queer pastor's guide to finding spiritual growth in the passages used to harm us. She has been a contributing correspondent at Good Faith Media for some time and recently came on board to oversee GFM's newest venture, the Faithful Pride Initiative. Kali, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Good to be back, Mitch.
Callie, we were so excited to have you here and to have you as part of our team. But before we kind of get into the Faithful Pride Initiative, I want to give our listeners a chance who may not know much about you to just learn more about you. So, aside from being truly one of the most brilliant human beings
Absolutely.
I know, I would like for you to share a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Absolutely. I've been doing a lot of writing for a while now. I have a background in theological education for a hot minute. Started studying religion in undergrad, have an undergrad degree from Carson Newman University, did my MDiv at the McAfee School of Theology, and have kept my toe in the water in terms of reading theology and academia and whatnot. Because I'm a big old nerd. You all know that about me. I read too much. Yeah, I mean, outside of that, though, I enjoy cooking. My wife and I enjoy playing nerdy board games. We have two adorable cats. Pretty average human, I'd say.
Yes, we all enjoy the photos of the meals you prepare and
Absolutely.
then have intense jealousy each evening as Mitch and I are trying to figure out what we're going to scrounge around for. And yes, you are very talented for sure.
Well, Kelly, we're going to be talking about the initiative here in just a second, but you're also a pastoral resident at Williamsburg Baptist Church. So, for our listeners who may not understand what a pastoral resident does, could you kind of explain that a little bit to them?
Absolutely. Ordinarily, a pastoral residency is designed for someone who has either recently graduated from seminary or maybe wrapping up their seminary journey as kind of practical field experience. Think of it as a medical student having a residency at a hospital.
Mhm.
That may not be where they land long term, but it allows them to get some incredibly practical experience. So I'm in this role not necessarily because I'm recently graduated from seminary or currently in seminary. I graduated from seminary in 2016, but to take some time doing some practical discernment about whether or not I still felt called to congregational ministry. And so it seemed like a residency was a good way to do that. And so the goal of the residency is to expose the resident to a wide variety of skills, to practice a lot of different things, just to make sure that we can do what's asked of us in whatever our longer term role would be, whether it's at this church or a different church.
Mhm. Well, I hope the church knows how lucky they got in selecting you as their resident.
Absolutely.
I feel just as lucky. They've made me feel incredibly welcome. They've made my wife feel incredibly welcome, and it's been an incredibly enjoyable experience so far.
Good.
So, Callie, you may not know this. I mean, you've worked alongside Good Faith Media for quite some time. You've been a contributing correspondent for us. You've also represented GFM at some different events. And the staff kind of came together and decided, how can we force Callie to hang out with us more? And so obviously the Faithful Pride Initiative was the logical answer to forcing you, because we just love every chance we get to be with you. But tell us from your perspective, like, what drew you to accept this role on top of everything else that you're doing?
That's a great question. I've been incredibly blessed to have this relationship with Good Faith Media, to be perfectly honest with you, from being one of the first groups to publish anything that I write, in terms of like op-eds and whatnot, to publishing my first book and hopeful to get that second one,
That's right.
finished. But I've just felt incredibly blessed by the relationship that we've established for the past several years. And so, as we've been doing more things together, like hanging out at Wild Goose or Q Christian Fellowship and other places, it just seemed like a natural yes. And I think what you all want to do with Good Faith Media's Faithful Pride Initiative is good and necessary right now. I feel like when we look at the public voices that are the loudest right now, they're not necessarily the kindest, most empathetic, fair, or just voices right now. There's so much hate against the LGBTQ plus community.
Mhm.
And so I feel like anything that we can do right now to put positive stories of queer people doing good things in the world out into the world is the kind of hope we need right now, is the kind of representation we need right now. And so the fact that Good Faith Media has already been doing this work for a while, right? It just wasn't under a fancy like rainbow banner,
Right.
right? But the fact that you all have been doing this work for a while and wanted to make it a more intentional effort, was really exciting to me. And of course, I love hanging out with you all as well. I'm excited for the opportunity to hang out with you all more. So
That's what I was looking for. That's the answer.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, Callie, obviously, you've come on board even more so than your previous role with us as contributing correspondent. But I just want to say out loud and to our listeners that, as we began to think about forming the Faithful Pride Initiative, I knew that there was only one person to really lead this initiative for Good Faith Media, and that was you. And there's a multiple reasons for that. Anybody who has read Callie's writings at Good Faith Media knows that she is an incredibly insightful writer. She reflects upon these texts, upon the passages, upon these issues in a very, very incredible, insightful way. And I just knew reading her material. And then you mentioned Wild Goose. So I've got to bring this up, Callie, that there's this moment at the Wild Goose Festival last summer in North Carolina where you and I, everybody else doing their thing, having a good time. But you and I sat down. There may have been scotch and cigars involved in that conversation, but you and I
maybe.
we had this incredible conversation about just theology at large. And I just so enjoyed that. I was inspired by it. I was challenged by that conversation. And I just knew if there's some way we could, get you even more in tune with Good Faith Media, that there was going to be a possibility that we could do that down the road. And here it is with the Faithful Pride Initiative. So I am so glad that you have joined us. I'm glad you've accepted our invitation. And here we are with the Faithful Pride Initiative. Now, we have been doing initiatives ever since our launch back in 2020, the Religious Gospel Initiative, the Faith and Democracy Initiative, the Preaching to Inspire Initiative, and then, of course, this is our newest and latest initiative, Faithful Pride. So, Callie, as you and I talked about what this initiative is going to mean, what are your plans for the initiative? What do you see for the future of the Faithful Pride Initiative?
Absolutely. I think a big part of it is what I mentioned earlier. What are those stories of LGBTQ plus people of faith doing good work in their communities that we don't know about, that we need to know about right now? Just because I don't know about you all, but like watching the news right now or just like doom scrolling on social media, I am just desperate and thirsty for something positive. And it's to the point where like I see a news story that's even just neutral and I tear up a little bit. It's like, thank God it's not bad. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like it's a it's rough in these internet streets right now. And so I think finding those stories that we can share about people who are doing good work is good and necessary right now. I also envision that we can broaden this beyond just queer Christians. There are lots of LGBTQ plus people in lots of different faith traditions doing good work, and I only know about an itty bitty tiny bit of them, just because my experience and my work is primarily in the Christian context, being a Baptist pastor. But I'm excited to get into those spaces a little bit more and to build some interfaith queer relationships and see how are LGBTQ plus people as a whole doing great work in faith avenues.
Mhm.
So that's something that I'm excited about to
Yeah.
see and just to learn about other things.
Yeah,
So
and there's this great educational component to the initiative as well. There's some lingering questions out there in the community about definitions and terminology and stuff like that. And you do a great job spelling that out for readers on the page at goodfaithmedia.org. One of those questions, is probably a question that a lot of people are asking themselves today. Like, what is the difference between queer theology and affirming theology? And you do a great job of explaining that on the page. So there's going to be more educational stuff there as well for people who are looking for resources.
absolutely. And I will go on record as saying that I certainly don't know everything. So there are times that I'm doing my research and I learn something new
Mhm.
about some of the communities that perhaps the LGBTQ plus community considers a little bit more niche, particularly when you start getting into the ACE spectrum or you get into the demisexual spectrum or gender flux. And like there's so many different terms of it. It's continually evolving. And so I find myself sometimes wondering, do I actually know as much as I think I know about this? So I'm excited to learn and then disseminate information too.
All right, I'm going to circle back to what you just said, the difference between queer theology and affirming theology. Talk to us about that for just a minute.
So queer theology pulls pretty heavily from queer theory. And the kind of baseline assumption in queer theology is that systems of patriarchy and homophobic renderings of text and homophobic beliefs and practices um, are kind of the terrible thing that needs to get overturned. We have to queer theology, so using queer as a verb there, to subvert it in order to take away its harmful teeth. Right.
Mhm.
So when you think about theology that is built from heteropatriarchy or from white supremacy and other systems of oppression that twist theology to support itself,
Mhm.
right? Queer theology says we need to wreck that and wreck it good
Mm.
so that it can no longer harm people. Um, it does lend itself to kind of pushing the boundaries on what is socially acceptable to talk about in the context of like sexuality and theology together. So if you go and read some of the staples of queer theology, like Marcia Altheus Reed, some of her stuff is pretty provocative and might lead to some folks metaphorically clutching their pearls if that's their first foray into queer theology.
Right.
So I would suggest maybe starting with someone like Patrick Cheng
Okay.
as kind of an in. But affirming theology um, effectively rebukes queer theology's foundational premise that there's something wrong with theology at all. It doesn't need to be queered, it doesn't need to be subverted. Affirming theology argues that we are the problem. You know, very much Taylor Swift, hi, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me.
Mm.
I'm not interpreting scripture well enough.
Mm.
And if I can find the perfect interpretive tool, then the Bible's fine. There's nothing wrong with the religious structures that there are right now. So it argues very much that nothing needs to be subverted, no carts need to be overturned or tables flipped or anything like that.
Okay, so I've got to insert a question right now for everybody who is my age and older. And that is this. We have been using the term queer theology now in our conversation. Now, Kelly, when I was growing up, queer was a slur, and it was very, very much discouraged in using that terminology. But now, it's used more frequently when describing theology, as you did just moments ago. So, for those of us who are, as you say, clutching our pearls when we, hear language like this, tell us a little bit about why that has now become not necessarily acceptable, but has become an acceptable term in defining theology in a queer way.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think even in the LGBTQ plus community, there is not consensus about using the word queer for anything. You know, we have some older folks in my congregation who are gay. And when they started hearing folks referring to themselves as queer, they were like, wait a second, what
Right.
is happening here?
Yeah.
So I do just want to highlight that there's a diversity of opinion within the community as well.
Mm.
Um, so I think, you know, most of us are probably aware that much of the angst around using the word is it historically was a slur
Right.
against LGBTQ plus people, particularly during the AIDS crisis, as an attempt to reclaim it, an attempt to say you the oppressor don't get to use words against me as a weapon.
Mm.
So an attempt to kind of reclaim or redeem in some sense, empower. I think some LGBTQ folks use queer in that way as the sense of empowerment to the community. Other folks, as more and more definitions and categories have come about, we can be more specific in how we talk about sexual orientations and gender identities. Um, it can get really thorough very quickly when you ask someone how they identify.
Mm.
So if someone is, let's say, hypothetically, a transmasculine, non binary person who is also a demisexual person, right? That's a lot to unpack for someone who maybe isn't connected to the community. So just kind of using queer as an umbrella term saves a lot of time and conversation,
Yeah.
especially if that individual doesn't want to take the time to kind of spell out what
Right.
every single part of that identity looks like. Some folks like to use the umbrella language of queer simply because it gives them a lot of fluidity
Mhm.
in the space and how they talk about themselves. Um, so those are some of the ways that I am aware of as the word gets used
And-
in terms of just in the community. But in academics, as you said,
Right.
that's literally the name of the field, like queer theory, queer theology, like those are just what the disciplines are.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought that up because there is a lot of changes, a lot of terminology that those of us who've been around a while are trying to learn, trying to grasp, trying to use in an appropriate way. Um, Obviously, and we're going to talk about some issues here in a moment, but there is a lot of language and identifiers that is used in these conversations. For those who feel a little bit overwhelmed and are afraid of making a mistake or causing offense, what would be your recommendation or advice to those people as they are setting out to learn more about the appropriate language, the appropriate identifiers? What
Mhm.
advice would you give to somebody who's just trying to learn all of this and consume it all because it's so much right now?
No, that's a great question. I think if you're in conversation with someone who you're pretty sure is part of the queer community or not,
Hmm.
just anybody, I'm also a big fan of normalizing these conversations, no matter how you identify. And just asking someone, hey, what pronouns should I use for you?
Hmm.
And because I think our cultural conditioning prompts us to just make an assumption without even thinking about it,
Hmm.
right? That's just how we go about things, and we're trying to be polite. So just taking a moment to interrupt that train of thought and saying, "I should ask this as a question instead of making this assumption."
Hmm.
And that takes time. Like it's rewiring
Right.
traps in your brain. But as much as possible, asking when you can. And in terms of resources, I know that Cody Sanders has a great book, um, doing youth ministry with
Hmm.
LGBTQIA plus
It's a
youth
great
is
book.
what I think it's called.
Yeah, it's a great book.
He has a fantastic glossary in there of terms that's kind of just like the ABCs of LGBT. So I highly recommend that. And then the Mama Bears just came out with a similar glossary that's a bit longer. The glossary is a booklet in and of itself. So I'm not sure if that's available on their website, but the Mama Bears do have that, and I've seen that at conferences. But then also, I think being gracious with yourself is a good thing to remember as you're learning. This is something that comes up a lot at church, actually. As we're growing, we're getting many more trans and non-binary members. And so, one thing that I saw online that I have shamelessly stolen and shared with our deacons, it's like, if you misgender someone, don't beat yourself up about it. Give that person 5 compliments in your brain using their correct pronouns. Like, they're a great artist. I love their laugh. Like just whatever it is, just like kind of in your brain having those positive associations. I've had to do that myself because I'm still learning new pronouns, especially when we get into they, them, or some of the neo pronouns and some of the ones that are just not necessarily in my regular vocabulary.
Right.
That has been helpful. So to whomever posted that on Instagram, I am forever grateful. I have no idea who it was. It was just like I saw it passing by in a doom scroll. So
Great
It's a
advice.
great exercise. So, Callie, let's talk about some of the current and pressing issues that our LGBTQ plus friends are dealing with right now.
yeah, absolutely. Um, the ones that I'm seeing in my current context is just the denial of medical care. I know that there are some trans youth in our community of Williamsburg whose doctors have stopped prescribing their HRT. And so just sitting with families who are navigating that right now is hard. And I think for so long we've been having conversations that's like, oh, well, this could never happen in this state. We're too blue for that. Right? Or this terrible thing could never happen to us because we feel like we're invincible in some way. And so it's just all of the hard things that have been in the media for the past, 6 years or so, attacking LGBT people or like proposed laws and whatnot. It's no longer hypothetical, it's real and it's happening.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that um, is hard, you know? And so finding ways to provide support um, is also hard.
I
And
bet.
I'm also thinking through how to balance, right? Sharing these stories that are happening right now, that are heavy, that are terrible, with also balancing the need for wanting people to feel protected and taking care of themselves without causing unnecessary panic,
Mm.
right? So my wife and I are in the process of finalizing our last will and testament, not because we think either of us are dying. I mean, everyone should take care of that at some
Right.
point.
Sure.
I think earlier than they think they should. But working with our lawyer to write it in such a way that it's not um, based on like spouse marital relationships. We're just using
Right.
our names for everything to ensure that even if a Burgerville v. Hodges gets overthrown, which is looking more and more likely,
Right.
and whatever other legal protections would get stripped away just because they're assumed as spouses, we would still be able to be who we need to be for each other in a legal sense.
Mhm.
So those are just some of the
Yeah.
weird things that I'm
These
aware
things
of
that we
right
don't
now.
always think about, like you mentioned. I mean, I knew about the medical care, but I hadn't thought about legally speaking the need, like you said, to remove that spousal language and insert names just to protect you both.
Right.
I hate that.
Kelly, I'm so glad you brought this up because there has been such a backlash over the last several years against the terminology of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of that, uh, a lot of that pushback and criticism is leveled directly against the LGBTQ plus community. And even more so, if we want to get more precise, it's the T within the LGBTQ community, and that's the trans community
Right.
that you brought up just a moment ago. Um, why do you think that there is such a pushback upon the equality that we've been able to achieve so far? Because we have made such great advances when it comes to inclusion and equality, that there has been a really strong pushback, especially against our trans friends. I mean, even to the point where Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom from California was outspoken this week about trans participating in high school sporting events. And so, could you can you help us make some sense about this? What can we do as people of good faith, Callie, to help advocate and ally with our trans community?
How long is this podcast?
Uh,
No, I think because you bring up some really good things. Just the how did we get here? I think is something that I'm hearing from a lot of folks in my congregation who are in disbelief, or even just talking with my friends. Like how did we get here? Um, and I think we could. There are so many different events that we could point to. We could point to the white lash after Obama presidency was up and Trump took office the first time. We could look at even like the AIDS crisis. We could look at segregation and desegregation in schools. Like there are so many pivot points that we can look back to see that we've been in this cycle before
mhm.
where a group like some marginalized groups come together to really make some significant achievements for their rights. And then the oppressors approach one or a few of the smaller groups within that kind of diverse group to say, hey, we'll get you X, Y, or Z if you'll sell these other people out. And I think that that's the part of the cycle that we're in right now. When I think back even to the Revolutionary War and Bacon's Rebellion, right? You had white indentured servants allying themselves with African slaves to revolt and win their rights back. And then the ruling class went to the white indentured servants and said, hey, guess what? We'll actually let you pay off your debts and own property if you'll just stop fighting. And
Mhm.
so they turned on the enslaved Africans. Right. And so it's like, this is something that we have seen before.
Mhm.
And in one sense, it's comforting the fact that there are strategies to come back from this. It's also frankly just infuriating because like why haven't we learned better by now,
Yeah.
that when we sell out our fellow humanity, people are still going to suffer and it's going to happen again and again and again.
Mhm.
So I think one of the best things that we can do right now is just resolve in our commitments not to sell out our neighbor,
Mhm.
whatever that looks like. Whether that looks like going to protest, whether that looks like calling your senators, if you're not that extroverted, whether that looks like, showing up in votes, refusing to talk to ICE if they come to your door, like whatever it looks like, um, just committing yourself to not selling out your neighbor for your own skin. And I know that's easier said than done. Um, There's a line in one of my favorite musicals, Hadestown. Like if anyone's been reading my stuff on Good Faith Media, you know I love Hadestown, and they just did a pro shoot with the original Broadway cast, and I'm just going to be losing myself whenever it's available to stream. But anyways, um, there's a line where you see Eurydice make the choice to let Hades take her to hell,
Mhm.
and the fates are in the background singing, you know, it's easy for you to judge her because you've got your belly full and she's starving. You never know what you're going to do when the chips are down. So like I
Yep.
say like this big talk of like don't sell out your neighbor,
Right.
knowing full well that we all have to make those decisions if, you know, the chips get thrown down for us.
Yeah. Well, I think that is great advice, and all that. And I have to admit that you were really gracious in your answer. I'm leaning more towards the being infuriated stage still with all of this. It just blows my mind and just angers me so much. Just so, but I appreciate your spirit and attitude that you take on this, and thank you for stepping up and leading this new initiative at Good Faith Media. So, Callie, where can the audience find out more about Faithful Pride Initiative?
Absolutely. So goodfaithmedia.org, of course. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and we're on Threads too, I
Oh
believe.
yeah, Blue
So all
Sky,
the social media.
TikTok.
Yeah, so make sure to follow Good Faith Media there to get updates and whatnot. And then we'll keep rocking and rolling from there.
Absolutely, and be sure to follow Callie too. You got a Substack, right?
I do. So you can search for my name. You can also search for Queer Faith is the name of my Substack. I'm doing a series on Lent right now.
Excellent.
So
Great. And you're going to be out and about on behalf of Good Faith Media at several events. We'll make certain to announce where Callie's going to be so that you can come up and have a conversation with her. Bring your own scotch and cigars, I've learned, but it'll be a great conversation.
we got to see what we can get past TSA. Okay.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Well, Kali Cawthon-Freels, thank you so much for joining us this week at Good Faith Weekly. But before we let you go, we've got one last question that we ask all of our guests, and I think you've answered it before, but I'm going to turn it over to Missy and let her ask it.
So, Callie, as you well know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
As cheesy as it sounds, everyone has a story, but it might not be the story you expect. You know, don't listen to the narratives that, you know, the big, loud, angry voices are telling right now. Go talk to those people and get their stories for yourself.
It's amazing.
Not cheesy at all.
No, I
And
love
even
that.
he is. I like a good block of cheese. So that is great.
Great.
It's very Cuda.
See what you did there,
See,
Callie?
told you. One of the most genius people I know.
Exactly.
I just like a good dad joke. What could I say?
Well, Callie, thank you so much for joining us. So, very best wishes on the launch of the new initiative, Faithful Pride. Check it out at goodfaithmedia.org. And of course, you're welcome back anytime. And I know that you're going to be a consistent guest with us now. So, thanks, Callie, for being with us.
Thank you, Callie.
Thanks, y'all.
See, I'm so excited about this initiative. We've already got 3 remarkable initiatives: the Raceless Gospel, Faith and Democracy, Preaching to Inspire, and now adding a 4th, the Faithful Pride Initiative.
I'm so excited about it as well. And after we talked to Callie, and I've just been thinking this week again as we've launched this initiative about why this is important. Obviously, you and I exist in a community and in a circle that's very welcoming and accepting and affirming. But I was just thinking back to kind of my background and my upbringing and just the assumption, you know, that that being LGBTQ plus IA anything other than, you know, a hetero cis person was sinful and was not right.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were pregnant with our first child and found out, you know, we were having a little boy, which I was thrilled about. And that one of my worries was that he would be gay.
Yeah. It's hard to believe now, isn't it?
It's so baffling to me. But the amount of headspace that this took up when I was pregnant, and again, I know when you're pregnant, you know, your hormones are out of whack, but even still, most people worry about their baby being healthy and being happy and all of these things. But I remember thinking about that quite often because I had attended a back in the day, they had women of faith conferences, and I had attended one in which one of the speakers had a gay child, and she was talking about how she dealt with that, which essentially boiled down to how do I keep my faith and my position in this space,
Mm-hmm.
and have this gay child, which she was not accepting of
Right.
at the time. I don't know if she is now, but anyways, I just remember thinking a lot about that and thinking of that in terms of what will I do, and also what would that mean for your career?
Mm-hmm.
At the time you were a pastor, and I just will never forget, this is a core memory for me. After he was born and sitting, in the living room feeding him again, he couldn't have been more than a month old, and looking at him, and it was just such an epiphany of realizing this is my child.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter to me who he loves. I want him to be happy. And that is so important to me, that how could I ever reject my child?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me angry that I grew up in a construct or in a community that would think there was anything less than beautiful about my child for who he loved in life,
Mm-hmm.
and who would ever take away his ability to be happy. And so I don't know, that was just kind of the beginning. You and I have talked a lot about, the deconstruction movement, which you and I have preferred to call reconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
Is that was kind of one of the big pivotal moments in my reconstruction journey, so to speak, is looking through the eyes of my child. And if we are God's children, we are all God's children. And I think if our Creator looks at us and says, I want you to be a whole human being and love who you love, that just made so much more sense to me than there
Yeah.
being rules and regulations on what makes you valuable as a human being. And so, like I said, you and I exist in a space where all people are loved and accepted for who they are, but just the remembrance that there's a young mom out there who
Mm-hmm.
might be wrestling with that same question about her child, that this message still needs to be shouted from the rooftops.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I think you're exactly right. And that's one of the main reasons, and there's several reasons that we launched the Faithful Pride Initiative. And that is simply that we have existed, and when I say we, those of us who call ourselves Jesus followers or Christians have existed in a dynamic that has been damaging not only for the victims of such oppressive theology, but even for those who espouse such oppressive theology. And I think about what our colleague Starlette Thomas often says when she looks in the mirror and challenges us to look in the mirror and declare, "You are somebody."
Right.
And who is anyone to tell you otherwise? And that's what historical Christianity seems to have attempted to do over time is to define you and to insist that you fit in a box and that you can't be anything other than what those in power say you are and hold a position that they say you can hold. And so we are fighting against that kind of theology. And how wonderful would it be if we could replace a theology of hierarchy and a theology of identity with a theology of love, as you just express when you looked at our son for the first time, you felt nothing but pure love for
Mm-hmm.
that human being in your lap. And to me, that's what we're trying to do here at Good Faith Media is to replace all of these dogmas and rules and regulations that are human made. They're
Mm-hmm.
human constructs and replace them and construct a theology built upon love and wholeness, understanding that life is difficult no matter who you are, and you're going to struggle and you're going to face opposition. But you are exactly who God created you to be. And this world's going to try to break you down. And because of that, you're going to have scars and you're going to be damaged. But God is on a quest to help you discover wholeness, not healing from something, but wholeness, to let you be who you truly are made to be. To me, that is the best part of what we're trying to do here at Good Faith Media.
Well, and love has no limits. I
Oh,
mean,
love that. Yeah.
it doesn't. And so I love kind of where Callie's taking this initiative and talking about folks in the queer community who are doing good things and just highlighting and amplifying those stories and those voices. So I'm so excited to see where she takes this Faithful Pride initiative, and I'm so proud that we're a part of it and able to help her along the way.
Absolutely. Well, Missy, it's been a great episode. Now we've got some very important news to get to. First of all, do you have a joy you want to share this week?
Oh, dang it. Okay, I do have a joy, and I'm going to talk about the last couple of weeks. We mentioned last week in our episode that we had been down at South by Southwest festival there, and then from there we were able to go out to Los Angeles to see our older son, who I referenced earlier, as he was performing in an improv show, and through that couple of weeks, we were able to go to about 4 comedy shows,
Right.
a mix of improv. We did musical improv and then stand up, and we went to a piano bar. But throughout that experience, just realized the importance of laughter and the joy in the midst of chaos and despair, just how important it is, and how fortunate we were to be able to take those moments to just go and be I don't know, just enjoy laughing together. And of course, I will say our son is infinitely hilarious, even though he wasn't in all the shows.
Mom brag.
But no, he did a great job. But no, just to be at all of the comedy shows, it just helps. It just helps
It just
in this
helps.
moment.
Just
So
helps. That's right.
my joy is that I have been able to laugh a lot
That's
in
a
the last
good
couple
one.
of weeks.
That's a good one.
So what's your hope?
Oh my goodness. It's very simple. It's our guest today. I mean, anytime I am able to sit down and talk with Kali, she is remarkable. I mean, I hope if you are not familiar with her writings and her book and her work, please familiarize yourself with her because she is really inspirational and remarkable. And so I feel a lot of hope knowing that we've got Reverend Kali on our team. That's exactly
Absolutely.
right.
Like I told her, we found a way to force her to hang out with us.
That's right. Well, all right. So the final piece of work we've got to do is we've got to get off this podcast because we've got to go look at our skunks.
No, they're gone.
We hope.
I know, I say that now. We'll be back next week with an update that they came back.
All right. We'll be back next week. Until next week, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.